Today I'm in Newbury. In a rare excursion outside of London, I'm in Newbury. Now, the story of Newbury Station actually predates the station itself by an awfully long time. Newbury is a market town in Berkshire. It lies on the old coaching road roughly midway between London and Bath, which was a hugely popular resort in the 18th century. In 1810, the Kennet and Avon Canal opened through the town. With the River Kennet as well, Newbury became a major transport hub. But there was a new invention on the way that was shortly to change all that. With the arrival of the railways, stagecoaches were rendered obsolete. Canals, of course, lasted longer, but they couldn't hope to compete on speed. The Great Western Railway, no relation of the current train operating company, opened a line from London to Bath in 1841, which completely bypassed Newbury. Potentially very bad news for the town. In the 19th century, while railway companies might not want to serve your town, they'd move heaven and earth to make sure that no one else did. And that's how Newbury came to get a railway. The London and South Western Railway were the Great Western Railway's deadly rivals, and in 1844 they proposed a line from Basingstoke to Swindon via Newbury. Swindon was one of the Great Western Railway's most important stations. They weren't about to let the South Western lads in, and so they put their own line forward, the Berks and Hants, from Reading to Hungerford. Parliament decided in favour of the GWR scheme, and in 1847 Newbury got its station. While Newbury was already an important town locally, the railways brought it new prominence. In 1862 the railway was extended to Devizes. Remember how I mentioned that the London and South Western and the GWR were rivals? Well, one of the big advantages the LSWR had was that it was a more direct route to Devon and Cornwall. In fact, the GWR was nicknamed the Great Way Round by its detractors. The GWR planned to use the Berks and Hants to get to Exeter faster. It didn't quite work out, but nevertheless it put Newbury more firmly on the railway map. In 1882, Newbury gained a new line, the Didcot, Newbury and Southampton Railway. This was an independent railway that, its promoters hoped, would provide a heavily used and lucrative rail link from the Midlands to the Channel coast. The company couldn't afford to run their own trains, so they approached the GWR. As Southampton was firmly within LSWR territory, the GWR were more than happy to invade. The politics around this railway are quite complicated and not really directly relevant to Newbury, but the long and short of it was that Newbury became a junction station. In 1898 a third line came to Newbury, the Lamborn Valley Railway, which ran from Newbury to Lamborne, which feels like a redundant piece of information, and I don't know why I left it in the script. This line had been given the go-ahead in 1883, but thanks to a shortage of funds it took 15 years to complete. It was very much a light railway built on the cheap, wooden buildings, low platforms and small locomotives. Unfortunately, despite all these cost-cutting measures, it lost money. When the GWR approached the company in 1904 about selling up, the directors were more than happy to do so, and the Lamborn Valley was taken over in 1905. Under the GWR, the line was significantly upgraded. So by the early 20th century, Newbury had gone from a town that no railway company was interested in to what I suppose we'd now call a railway hub, serving 3 lines. But success brought its own problems. 3 lines meant that the station could become very congested. So between 1908 and 1910, the old station was rebuilt. The platforms were extended and new buildings were constructed. To deal with the congestion issue, new signal boxes were built and a couple of passing loops, the railway equivalent of a lay-by, were put in so that stopping trains wouldn't hold express trains up. During the Second World War, the railway would wind up inadvertently betraying the town. German bombers in 1943 were able to find Newbury by following the railway. In the resulting raid, 15 people were killed and 41 injured. This aside, the railways here proved extremely useful to the war effort, with the Didcot, Newbury and Southampton carrying up to 120 trains a day. As its builders had hoped, it proved to be an essential link between the Midlands and the South Coast in the run-up to D-Day. The post-war era brought hard times for rural railways as buses, lorries and cars poached much of their traffic. The Lamborn Railway and Didcot, Newbury and Southampton railways were both badly affected, and despite attempts to economise with the introduction of diesel multiple units, closure was inevitable. The section of the Didcot, Newbury and Southampton between Newbury and Shawford Junction closed in 1960. The rest followed in sections over the 1960s, with the final section north of Newbury going in 1967. In my personal opinion, given the line's proven usefulness, this was a short-sighted move. But then there aren't many closed railways I wouldn't say that about. There have been attempts to get the line reopened, but since so much of the route has now been built over and the A34 road follows part of the line, it's probably never going to happen. As for the Lamborn Valley, well, it was hoped in the early 50s that it might get a renaissance with the opening of a branch line to RAF Welford. Unfortunately, this was not to be. The line bumbled along for a bit, with single-coach trains often hauled by ancient locomotives, and goods trains that might consist of a single wagon. Oddly, British Railways, who by now controlled all public railways in, well, Britain, dragged their feet on introducing economical diesel railcars on the line. In November 1973, the last trains ran and the Lamborn Valley too closed. There was talk of turning it into a heritage railway, but alas, this was not to be. One of the old bay platforms is now used for terminating trains, and the other is a car park. Newbury Station, though reduced, remained open. In 2018, electrification finally reached Newbury. Unfortunately, at the time of writing, it goes no further than that. The old footbridge was removed, and the canopies were cut back. More changes are planned. When I filmed this, the station was being rebuilt to incorporate retail units, a new car park, and a new bike park. The story of Newbury Station began with the town being snubbed. Now it's not only a busy and successful station, but it's likely to get even busier. The story is far from over. Hello there, I do hope you enjoyed today's video. If you did, I'd be grateful if you'd leave a little like and perhaps even subscribe for more. I thought it might be interesting to cover a station outside of London for once, which I assure you had nothing to do with the fact that I have friends in Newbury and one of them was celebrating a birthday. I would like to cover more stations outside London now and again, and I do have a few ideas for the future. Now is the time when I once again thank my donors on Ko-fi and Patreon. You are the light railway to my Lamborn Valley. And I'll see you all again very soon. Cheerio.